Most people knew Nico as the shy boy who sang outside Manila cafes for spare coins. But no one knew the truth behind his voice. He didn't sing to be famous, he sang to keep a promise to the man who raised him. And today, on the biggest stage of his life, that secret was about to touch millions. Nico had always believed that music was its own kind of prayer, soft, trembling, and capable of reaching places words could never touch. In the narrow alleyways of Manila where he grew up, surrounded by rusted tin roofs, woven bamboo walls, and the scent of fried garlic drifting from every corner, music was the one thing that made life feel bigger than the world he knew. He wasn't born into privilege. His mother worked 2 jobs, and his father had disappeared before Nico even learned how to say his name. But Nico wasn't lonely, not as long as Lolo Ramon was there. Lolo was the type of man whose smile made wrinkles look like stories, and whose voice, even at 70, still carried a bit of the rock and roll he'd loved as a young man. Every night, when the streetlights flickered on and the alley quieted down, Lolo would pull out his old transistor radio, its antenna bent like a crooked finger, and tune in to stations that played Elvis Presley. Most kids Nico's age were listening to modern music, but not Nico. His soul leaned into the old songs like they were home. Lolo would tap his foot and say, "Listen, Apo. This part here, how he sings it, like he's telling a secret. Music isn't about being loud, it's about being honest." Those words stayed with Nico, and as he learned to mimic the smooth tremble of Elvis's voice, he realized he wasn't just copying a sound, he was learning how to feel. They sang together under the streetlight almost every night. Sometimes, neighbors would stop and listen, smiling as Lolo harmonized while Nico carried the melody. Sometimes tired workers passing through the alley would drop a few coins onto the step where Nico sat. Not because they had much to spare, but because the boy's voice eased something inside them. But the real moments happened inside their small home. When Lolo's health began to fade, everything else in their world seemed to fade with it. The man who once danced while frying bongoos in the kitchen now struggled to breathe after walking a few steps. The old transistor radio sat beside his bed, crackling softly with static between songs. And Nico, still so young, yet carrying a heart too big for his age, would sit beside him each night. "Are you tired, Lolo?" he'd ask. "No, Apo," Lolo would whisper, forcing a smile. "As long as you sing, I'm strong." And so Nico sang every single night. Softly, tenderly, like each lyric was a hand holding his grandfather close. He sang "Can't Help Falling in Love, Love Me Tender." And always on my mind, his small voice trembling yet full. Lolo would close his eyes, chest rising slowly, sometimes humming along even when he didn't have the strength to speak. When Lolo passed away, it felt like the world had fallen silent. The alley was the same, the streetlights still flickered, and the transistor radio remained where it always sat. But without Lolo's voice beside him, singing felt different, lonelier, heavier. Still, Nico sang. He sang not for coins, not for people passing by, but because every note gave him a moment with the man he loved more than anything. His voice became his way of keeping Lolo alive, and little did he know, that same voice would one day carry him far beyond the alley and to the biggest stage in the country. The rain fell in steady sheets over Manila that afternoon, turning narrow alleys into rivers of reflections and puddles. Nico huddled under the small awning of a corner food stall, his guitar case resting beside him, soaked from countless performances on rainy days, just like this one. He didn't mind the rain. It had a way of making his voice sound more haunting, more alive, carrying each note like a whispered secret across the wet streets. He strummed the opening chords of Cartel's Falling in Love, and the familiar, tremble in his voice filled the alley. Passers-by hurried along, umbrellas bouncing, but some slowed, listening, letting the melody reach past the rain and into their hearts. Nico's eyes were closed, focused, as if he was speaking directly to Lolo Ramon, sharing every emotion he had bottled up since his grandfather had passed. Unnoticed at first, a woman with a smartphone had stopped under a nearby awning. She had been rushing home from work when the music froze her in place. Her fingers, holding the camera, trembled slightly as she captured the boy, who seemed to sing not just with skill, but with the weight of a lifetime of love and loss. She didn't plan to, but she filmed the entire song, feeling a lump form in her throat. Each note Nico sang seemed to resonate with something deep inside her. Something she had been missing for years: hope, warmth, and the reminder that simple human kindness could exist in the smallest gestures. When Nico finished, he opened his eyes and smiled softly. A few coins clinked into his guitar case. He thanked the passerby quietly, not realizing how extraordinary that performance had been. The woman uploaded the video online before heading home, thinking it would disappear into the endless stream of social media content. But by the next morning, it hadn't vanished. It had exploded thousands, then millions. Had watched the boy whose voice seemed to echo the golden tones of Elvis Presley while carrying a depth far beyond his years. Comments poured in. "I've never heard anything like this. This kid has a gift that could change the world," I cried, watching him. Even television producers had noticed. One email stood out among the hundreds that flooded his inbox: an invitation to audition for AGT Manila. Nico stared at the screen. He hesitated. Me? On a stage? In front of thousands of people? I'm just a street singer, he whispered. Doubt and fear gnawed at him. The alley had been his stage, his sanctuary, his connection to Lolo, and stepping beyond it felt terrifying. Then, almost like a whisper carried on the rain, he remembered Lolo's words: "A good voice can heal a hurting heart. Don't keep it hidden, Apo, share it." His chest tightened, and a small spark of courage ignited within him. Maybe this was what Lolo had meant all along, not just to sing for survival. Not just to sing for himself, but to sing for the world. With a deep breath, Nico picked up his guitar. He looked at the email again and smiled, a mixture of nervousness and determination in his eyes. For the first time, he allowed himself to imagine something beyond the alley. A stage, lights, and a chance to touch hearts far beyond Manila. The rain continued to fall outside, but inside Nico, something had already changed. A new journey had begun. The backstage area of AGT Manila buzzed with nervous energy. Contestants practiced, whispered words of encouragement to each other, and fiddled with their instruments. Nico sat in a corner, his guitar resting against his knee, hands trembling. Ever so slightly, he stared at the floor, trying to steady his breath. The magnitude of the stage ahead, the bright lights, the cameras, the audience, and the judges was enough to make anyone falter. But Nico wasn't there to falter. He was there for Lolo Ramon, for the nights he had sung beside his grandfather's bed, and for the countless strangers whose hearts he had unknowingly touched on rainy Manila streets. When his name was called, Nico felt every heartbeat echo in his chest, like a drum. He walked toward the stage, feeling the wooden boards beneath his worn shoes. As he stepped under the blinding lights, the audience became a blur of faces, but he didn't flinch. He gripped his microphone like it was a lifeline, remembering Lolo's words: "Sing from your heart. Every note is a story. Every story is a gift." The judges smiled politely, nodding in encouragement, their expressions expectant but guarded. Simon Cowell, famously hard to impress, leaned back in his chair, arms crossed, his eyes narrowing slightly. Nico felt a pang of fear but ignored it. He closed his eyes and let the world fall away. Then he sang. At first, the melody was soft, almost hesitant, a delicate tremor of sound that filled the room with a quiet intensity. But as Nico's confidence grew, so did the power in his voice. Every note carried the emotion of his childhood. The laughter of Lolo Ramon. The quiet moments under the streetlight. The nights of rain-soaked singing that had kept them both alive. It wasn't imitation, it was honesty. His Elvis-like timbre, smooth yet raw, resonated with a warmth that seemed to seep into every corner of the theater. The audience, initially polite, grew silent. Every eye was fixed on Nico. Even the cameras seemed to pause, capturing the young boy whose voice was older than his years. Tears welled up in some of the front-row spectators, and whispers of awe floated through the room. Nico's guitar strummed alongside his voice, each chord amplifying the sincerity of his performance. Every word he sang was more than a note. It was a story of love, loss, and hope. Mid-song, Nico opened his eyes briefly. He saw Simon Cowell leaning forward, his usual skepticism replaced by disbelief. The other judges were equally captivated, some dabbing at tears, others completely still, absorbing the honesty and depth of Nico's voice. For a moment, the room seemed suspended in time, caught between awe and emotion. When Nico reached the final chorus, his voice cracked not from weakness, but from the intensity of feeling. He was singing for Lolo, for every person who had believed in him, for the strangers who might hear and feel less alone. The music became a bridge connecting hearts across the room, uniting audience, judges, and performer in a shared human experience. As the last note faded, the theater remained silent for a heartbeat, then erupted in applause so thunderous, it nearly lifted Nico off his feet. He exhaled, a mix of relief and joy flooding through him, realizing that for the first time, his gift had truly been seen. As Nico's final chords lingered in the air, the room seemed suspended in a fragile, breathless silence. His fingers rested lightly on the strings of his guitar, trembling from the intensity of every note he had poured out. Then, in a quiet voice that carried across the vast theater, he whispered, "For you, Lolo?" Those 3 words, soft yet unwavering, were enough to unravel the hearts of everyone watching. The audience, the judges, even the crew behind the cameras all felt the weight of a grandson's love echoing through the theater. It wasn't just a performance. It was a confession, a tribute, a lifetime of devotion distilled into a single, raw, vulnerable moment. Simon Cowell, known for his critical eye and famously stoic demeanor, leaned forward in his chair. His eyebrows shot up in disbelief, his mouth opening slightly, as if he couldn't quite comprehend the purity and depth of what he was hearing. The sharp edge of his skepticism had softened into awe. He wasn't just witnessing a talented singer, he was witnessing a young man who had lived every lyric, every note, and every pause. In the crowd, tears streamed freely. A woman clutching her child tightly sobbed openly, feeling the boy's voice pierce through the barriers of her own pain. She wasn't alone. Strangers reached for each other's hands instinctively, offering comfort as a wave of empathy and shared emotion swept through the theater. Some held phones, unsure whether to capture the moment or simply absorb it, while others closed their eyes, letting the music wash over them like a healing tide. Nico's voice faltered slightly as the song neared its final notes, cracking with emotion. But it was perfect because it was real. Every tremor spoke of nights spent singing in rain-soaked alleys, of a grandfather's fading breaths, of a promise kept through music. The vulnerability in his voice allowed every listener to feel his journey, his grief, and ultimately, his unshakable hope. Backstage, A few producers and assistants quietly dabbed at their eyes, careful not to disturb the moment. Nico, unaware of the magnitude of his effect, focused entirely on the connection he was forging with the room. His voice, once a secret gift sung only for Lolo Ramon, now rippled through the hearts of strangers, touching a universal chord of humanity. As the final note dissolved into the theater's acoustics, the audience sat in stunned silence for just a heartbeat. Then, as if on cue, the room erupted into a standing ovation. Applause thundered, cheers filled the air, and even the most composed judges were visibly moved. Simon Cowell's eyes glistened as he waved a hand toward Nico, the usual sharp critique, replaced by genuine admiration. For Nico, it wasn't the applause that mattered. It was the face, is wet with tears, lit with awe, softened by the truth of the performance. In that moment, he realized that his music wasn't about fame or recognition. It was about connection, healing, and the kind of love that can transcend even the deepest loss. Nico stepped back, a quiet smile on his face, understanding that through his voice, he had touched hearts far beyond what he had ever imagined. For a moment, the world seemed a little kinder, a little softer, and a little more full of hope. As the final echoes of Nico's song faded into the vast theater, the applause continued, thunderous and unrelenting. Judges rose to their feet, the audience clapping and cheering with tears streaking down faces. Nico lowered his guitar, his chest heaving, a mixture of relief, awe, and quiet joy washing over him. Every heartbeat felt amplified, every sensation sharper, because for the first time, he realized the true power of his voice. Backstage was a whirlwind of congratulations, handshakes, and embraces. Fellow contestants smiled and whispered praises, but Nico barely noticed. His mind was still on the audience, the connection he had just felt, and the invisible thread linking him to Lolo Ramon. He had always sung for love, for memory, for hope. He now understood that music could do something even more profound. It could heal strangers' hearts. Then, amidst the chaos, he felt a gentle tap on his shoulder. He turned to see the woman who had filmed him that rainy afternoon, the one who had unknowingly set this journey into motion. Her eyes glistened with tears, and her hands were slightly trembling. She smiled softly, her voice catching as she spoke. "You don't know me, but that day. Your music saved me," she said, her words breaking through the hum of celebration. "I was at my lowest, thinking life had no more surprises. And then I heard you sing. I felt hope again. Hope I didn't think I'd ever feel." Nico's throat tightened. He looked down at his hands, then back at her. "I just sang," he whispered, almost embarrassed by the weight of the praise. "I never thought it could mean that much." She shook her head, smiling through her tears. "It does. You gave me courage. You reminded me that love and kindness still exist in this world. Your voice, it heals." For a moment, Nico was speechless. Then a warmth spread through his chest, a feeling he had longed to understand, that the gift he had carried silently, night after night, alley after alley, had a purpose far beyond his imagination. The music wasn't just about memory or grief. It was about connection, about creating a ripple of kindness that traveled further than he could ever see. The woman hugged him, and for the first time, Nico allowed himself to fully feel the joy of giving. It was a quiet, profound happiness, more lasting than applause, more real than fame. And in that embrace, he understood something his grandfather had always known. A single voice, filled with love and sincerity, could touch thousands of hearts. Later that evening, Nico stepped out of the theater into the Manila night. The city lights shimmered, the streets alive with energy, yet everything felt different. The world seemed softer, brighter, and a little kinder. He thought of Lolo Ramon, smiling in the stars, and whispered, "We did it, Lolo, we made a difference." From that night forward, Nico's music wasn't just his own, it belonged to everyone who needed hope, healing, and a reminder that love and compassion could change lives. One voice, one act of sincerity, one heartfelt song. It was all it took to make the world a better place. And in the hearts of everyone who heard him, Nico's message lived on. Kindness has power. Love has strength. And even the smallest gestures can create a legacy that lasts forever.